Today, I want to welcome Sean Languedoc. It's a French Canadian name, but he speaks very clear English. And as a matter of fact, we burned almost an entire interview just kind of talking in the green room. This is going to be an exciting discussion by somebody who has built 5 companies. And obviously, he knows what to do right, but he also knows what to do wrong. Like many of us in the process, he stepped on the rake a few times. And one of the things in particular we're going to talk about is watching out for the ego and releasing it. His current company is outforce.ai. That's outforce.ai, not .com, outforce.ai. And they make outsourcing easy and specifically helps venture-backed companies safely source and scale engineering teams located either next door to offshore. And he's got a process that basically takes a lot of the pain out of it. So anyway, Sean, welcome.
Thank you, Craig. Nice to be here.
One of the things that we were talking about, and it's an interesting thing in the context of, part of what you do is offshore, but you also include next door. But one of our discussions in the green room that I actually wish we had recorded was about, American engineering and American, I'm obviously saying North America, you're up in Canada. I'm not trying to exclude
Yeah. No
you and
worries.
my
No worries.
brethren up north, but but there is something, just phenomenally good, amazing engineering talent. And we've seen companies rise and fall, great companies like Nortel, Research
Yep.
in Motion, and others,
BlackBerry. Yeah. Yeah.
BlackBerry. And I don't know, as we kick off, you've seen these companies rise and fall. What's your take on what happened? Where did we go wrong?
Oh man, those are two great examples. And you talked about hitting it off with let ego get out of the way. I had a friend who was an advisor to one of my first companies who was an advisor to Nortel. And he was in the room telling them that voice is dead and data is the future. And they fired him. Imagine what would have happened if they listened to him. Another friend, we talked about Motorola. He went in the late 1980s, early 1990s. He's a professor at the Rotman School of Business, which is kind of like the Harvard of Canada, and he does business strategy. And in the summertime, he gets hired by these Fortune 100s to walk through strategy. Motorola was one of his clients, and he does this as a business case for his students. He says, he comes in and he's a futurist and a behavioralist. And he described the future of mobile technologies. And he said, just like Steve Jobs did in the introduction of the iPhone, it's all these 3 things in one. It's a phone, it's a player, it's a video camera, you know. And he said, everything's going to get compressed, and it's going to get compressed into a mobile device. And at the time, Motorola was killing it with the Razor. Like, they had market share growing like crazy. And he literally presented this to the board, and he designed for them the iPhone, effectively, at least the functionality of it, not definitely not the design that Apple had, but the functionality. And they said, that's really cool, but it's not our business.
Oh,
And then
wow.
same thing, the famous story of BlackBerry, how they missed the opportunity when they saw what happened with iPhone. They had probably the best secure messaging system in the world. They could have leveraged software instead of hardware, but they were glorious in the hardware business and revolutionized it to such a point that they didn't think anyone could eventually beat it. And guess what happened? They went out of business. So they're not out of business, but they're effectively not what they used to be. So all of these have to do with being able to let go and move to where the market is going to go. The famous Gretzky line, right? Move to where
Yeah,
the puck is going.
yeah, a good Canadian quote.
Yeah.
But that's, here's where that gets really hard. Because I can think of people that tried to skate to where the puck was going, or at least where they
Yeah.
thought it was going. And they got out there and there was no puck, there were no players, there was
Right.
nothing there. I personally think the Apple Vision Pro is going to be the biggest failure since the anniversary Mac, from like
Could be.
97.
Could be. Yeah. Yeah. Could
Um,
be.
so I guess the question is, how do you balance that? So from a concept of conservatism, not, political conservatism, but ideological conservatism, there's safety in conserving what's been proven, and going off and doing the wild and crazy is scary. But, clearly, multiple companies have, research in motion. By the way, for those that don't know, if you were in business, you had a BlackBerry. There was a day that if you were in business, you had a BlackBerry. That was the phone that you had. And they absolutely dominated that market. Now they're, like you said, effectively gone. And so conservatism would say, hey, this is what got us here. Why don't we keep going? But they missed it.
Yeah. Yeah. And it's it's the cycle of an ecosystem. A forest grows a big tall tree falls down, one sprout off of its out of the feeder tree. It happens all the time, and we're not immune to it. Where companies do well is when they dedicate a portion of their budget towards innovation that is so disruptive it's actually going to destroy the business inside. Intel used to do that all the time, so I'm sure it still does. Google used to provide the 20% of the week. One day of the week you'd have to work on something that had nothing to do with what you're working on. Go create something new. That creates a great ecosystem of innovation in a company that creates a culture of change, as opposed to hanging on for dear life what you got.
So you said something and it slipped by so fast. I want to make sure people capture it because I think it's really key. You have to have a culture. And I'm going to reword what you said, because I forgot what you said precisely, but it's basically a culture where you actively try to obsolete the things that are making money.
That's right. That's right. Yeah. Because you have to be thinking like you're like you're like a new company coming into the market. Who's going to disrupt this? Well, it may as well be us.
Yeah.
Right. And why not? If you have budget to do that. I mean, some people are running a business and they can barely make ends meet. But there you have to look at what innovations are out there already that you can rent through a software as a service license to help accelerate the productivity of your own teams to actually execute on the business you're trying to execute on with a lot less friction.
Yeah.
And there's tons of that.
I don't think I can think of a better example of that, of the iPod. So when the iPod came around, Apple was a barely profitable company. The iPod made it outrageously profitable. And within just a few years, Steve Jobs started working on obsoleting the iPod. Now you can't buy one.
Yeah. And there was and Apple's culture was a closed loop culture. Apple made software for its products. Nobody else did. Then they introduced the App Store. They created a development community that would make money off of building apps for Apple. That was a complete mind bender for a lot of people at that organization.
Yeah.
So that's a good culture of innovation, and changing and breaking your own rules to support where the market's going to go.
So how's it played out for you? You've launched 5 companies, and just reality says everything didn't go swimmingly.
Yeah. There's the line that that people think there is, and then there's the squirrely line that goes up and down and around backwards and everything else that gets to the other end, to that same endpoint. And that's the one I've taken.
Yeah. What did it look like?
Messy. Everything's messy when you're building a business, and just being aware of, like, if you're starting a business, for example, from scratch, there's no way in hell that what you're thinking is going to be the business ends up being the business. It's a good starting point and a good thesis potentially, and there might be enough market research to suggest intellectually that it's going to work. But people act emotionally, and they justify what their actions are with intellectual, as opposed to the other way around. So if you're a good thinker and you're thinking everyone's going to love this, wait till they try it. Then you'll figure out what will actually work. And that's been the case for a lot of companies I've been with and businesses that I've run. And in some cases, the circumstances have changed dramatically. So this last company, most of my companies have been tech companies where I would need to use a recruiter for hiring engineers and an outsourcing agency to build extra product if I needed some speed and quality that I couldn't get fast enough. I built actually international recruiting agency of high-end engineering. So the problem in North America is we don't make enough high-end engineers, and they make them a lot in other markets. South Africa is great for mathematicians. Eastern Europe, phenomenal for full stack engineering and that kind of thing. So some of those people want to move to the country. It used to be that you'd want all your engineers in one place, right? Pre-COVID, everyone had to come to the office. Post-COVID, nobody had to come to the office. So two things happened for me in Canada. As I was bringing these people in with COVID, nobody could come to Canada. So that business was completely wiped out. But I rethought about the opposite problem I had whenever I was trying to outsource. It's water everywhere and not a drop to drink. Like there's just, like I said in the beginning of the show, there's probably 100 emails you'll get in a month from outsourcing agencies you've never heard of, offering you to build anything you could ever dream of, right?
Right.
There's just way too many choices, and you don't know what's real, and you don't know what to do. So you go to your friends, and you say, hey, I don't trust any of this noise. I'm going to go talk to a friend who's had an experience with an outsourcing agency. Hey, Craig, do you know anybody who's good? And Craig, you may know somebody who's good, but it's probably somebody in the telco space. And I might be in the fintech space or the health tech space, or I might be a restaurateur, and they know nothing about my business. So that's a total waste of 3 months training them about how the business works, the laws of the business, everything else. And even if they are the right agency in the right space, chances are they don't have their best engineers just sitting around the office all day waiting for me to call. They've got all their best engineers deployed. So unless they've got a project that's just finishing and a team that's coming off that actually knows your space and in the same tech stack, your chances are very slim that you're going to get that, right? With one or two agencies you might call on from friends. So the next thing you do is you go online and you look at, oh, I hear there's great, engineers in Brazil or Argentina or Ukraine or Poland. And you're taking a lucky guess. But that's like saying there's great hockey players in Canada, and there are. But if you pick me, I'm a skier. So it's kind of a bad way to pick. And you're also picking based on the ones that are best advertising. So that can be a waste of time. And then, nobody really has the time to get the data to make a good decision to select a good agency. And so I realized that was my problem as well. So I pivoted from being this recruiting agency to becoming the facilitator of a better match between what a client needs and who are the best agencies locally or not locally for what they wanted to do. And that's been a great outcome for all my clients and a great service for the industry generally, because nobody really has the time to get the data, and very few people have a good process. Like you talk to the lead of the organization when you want to talk to an agency, right? Like, hey, I run the company. I'm going to talk to their person who runs the company, or at least their head of engineering. And you'll get the best interview you'll ever have because they know exactly how to answer all your questions because they do it all day long. But they won't tell you who they've got on their team that's available next week to start the job.
Yeah.
And that's what we do. We do a bottom-up process. So we only let our clients talk to the agency that has the right team at the right time with the right skills and the right cultural fit. Speaks English perfectly well if that's required, or communicates among each other perfectly well if that's required. And those are generally table stakes, but a lot of people miss on those things.
Wow. Now, you said something a couple minutes ago that honestly caught me a little bit off guard. You said that North America is not great at, what did you say? It was expert, deep expert. There was some type of expertise related to.
But no, we have a shortage of engineering.
Shortage.
It's that we're not good at it. No. I mean, the best engineers in the world are in North America right now because they came here to get educated and they stayed here, most of them. So I don't know. No, but there are really good engineers from other countries who would love to work in North America or for a North American company, like phenomenal. So, notwithstanding the relationships that have been strained with Russia, But one of the great things that Russia did for all of Eastern Europe was build a really good technical engineering culture.
Yeah.
So you have phenomenal full stack engineers out of those countries that are no longer part of the Russian Federation, but the legacy is the education. So that's just a good signpost. You know, like I said, South Africa, phenomenal for mathematics. Gaming industry seems to be very strong in South Africa as well. So there's pockets of really good strength in certain sectors. Latin America, Central America, really good at creative front end engineering. You know, just I don't know why, just Latin culture maybe, and just creativity in the sun. Who knows?
Yeah.
But
Well, and it's interesting. One of the things I heard somebody explain that there's a good reason that Silicon Valley is where it is, and that AI is all coming out of Silicon Valley. And they actually took it all the way back to what was the big movement, the hippie movement in the 60s and 70s. And
okay,
there's something in the way people think there. They just, yeah, maybe it's too much LSD or what, but they just think differently and they come up with ideas that really help move things forward. And so it makes sense that, if we could have that in the United States, that other areas, like you said, perhaps Latin America, just their culture lends itself to naturally, good creative front end work.
yeah, no, and just even at an engineering level, at the pure level, different cultures bring different value and different ways of thinking about how to solve a problem. So all this diversity and inclusion stuff, it's great, philosophically, but in practice, I've seen it a lot where, some people just can't think out of the box. And some people, and even in another culture, some people can't think out of the box, but you put those two boxes together and you go, whoa, okay, here's the solution. It's
Yeah.
pretty cool. Really cool.
Years ago, my first job out of university, I worked with a Polish guy who I think whatever happened behind the Iron Curtain really put the zap on him.
Mm.
He's the only guy I think he's the only guy I've ever worked with that I could legit see showing up at work with an AK-47 and shooting up the place. He was unstable, but the dude was brilliant. And I remember, one time in particular, we were working on this problem and he said, well, why don't you try this? And he was like dead on. I mean, we'd been working on a problem for 2 weeks. He just looked at it. He said, why don't you swap these two parts? We swapped those two parts and it worked.
Right.
Uh, I was excited. And so I went back and I told him, I said, hey, Bogdan, you nailed it. And my boss was standing there. I'm saying this in front of our mutual boss. I'm like, Bogdan, you nailed it. You fixed it. And he looks at me. He's like, I don't know what game you're playing, but I want no part of it.
Oh, that's too funny. That is so funny. I talk about this, that in culture, in the way we hire in North America, we tend to want to hire people we're going to like. Like it's the old airport rule. If I'm stuck for 8 hours in an airport, do I want to be with this person while I'm in the airport? Like that kind of thing, right? So there's the vertical axis is, likability, or that kind of a spectrum, and then the horizontal axis is skills. And so in North America, we will sacrifice skills for likability. We want them, not in the top. If they can't fit in the top right quadrant, we'll take them higher up in the quadrant regardless. And we think we can move them over in the skills. And in other cultures, it's way off on the skills. I don't care about likability. You're a mercenary. Get your stuff done.
Yeah.
And that tends to be sort of an Eastern European culture as well. So where you have a culture where likability is really important, and you introduce somebody from that culture, and they're like, nobody knows what's going on. I'm the only one who can fix this. That's the kind of culture they got. That can break a whole team apart, right? So that's why you have to look not just for skill, but also cultural fit in whenever you're doing something like outsourcing. And I guess back to your point about North America. No. When we make a selection process, we say, don't pick a country, don't pick a geography, don't even pick a price. Pick the best team that you can get to build or rebuild or fix or whatever it is you need to do, and then negotiate on price. Because, yes, North American talent is more expensive than in other countries, But if that team is 250% more productive and your savings is 30% in another country, what the heck are you thinking? Like, think about the outcome and the productivity. So I'm full advocate of what accelerates the outcome at the best value as opposed to best hourly rate.
Yeah. So somewhat recently, Google made a move that kind of surprised me. And they obviously, a lot of these larger companies have been outsourcing jobs for years. That's nothing new. But they took some of their core functions. I think it was their Python and their internal Python development and something else. And they moved those out of Mountain View and they moved one function down to, I think, Mexico and the other function over to India. And that really surprised me because, what I was used to seeing was kind of the core engineering functions being maintained in North America with some of the peripheral work moved offshore. One, I don't know if you noticed that, but if you did or didn't, I'm interested in your take on that. What do you think's driving that?
I couldn't address that specifically, but there is a very, I would say, almost, it's almost, I don't want to say racist, but we have these preconceptions about where the best talent is and where it's going to work best. And, and this happened a lot where you have people from another country, nobody recognizes the university they came from. But in that country, that university is the Stanford of their country, right?
Right.
But to get into that Stanford with their population, it's a fraction of a fraction of a fraction of a percentage to get into that school. So it is really a tough school to get into.
Yeah. Like IIT
In India.
Yeah.
That's exactly where I was going. Yeah. So IIT in India, like Google, Facebook, Tesla, everybody's sitting outside the graduating class offering $250,000 signing bonus just to join the company. No interviews, I mean, obviously there's interviews, but like that's the level of filtering that they've done to get, they could have done watercolors for their student studies. They're just that smart to get in there. So to say that they're moving it to there, I don't know the specifics of it, but it might be the suggestion that they in themselves were probably maybe a large contingent of that team might have already been from that country and could then recruit more people more easily. And remote's okay.
Yeah. Interesting. Well, as we wrap up, if somebody were about to scope out something, how do we make them a better shopper of remote engineers? What would be your kind of quick advice to be a better shopper of remote engineers?
Well, remote, as I said, it could be down the street. It doesn't mean India. It doesn't mean Mexico. It just means someone who's not in your office. Yeah, you can look at Google and try and get it that way on your own. It's going to be challenging to figure out who's real and who's not. I would look at the hero labels on the websites to see if there's any that are in the same industry as yours as a starting point. Because if they've got a good project in your space, then they kind of understand the space. Then ask them if they have engineers who are coming off a project who've worked together that have built projects in your space, and then interview those engineers before you interview anybody else from that organization, because you want to know that those are the ones that are going to come on your team. Now, it's still, a needle in a haystack because there's so many out there and they could tell you a lot of things, but that's a good starting point. I am publishing a document by the end of this month that is the definitive guide to outsourcing. So it's got all the secrets. All you need to do is sign up on our site and I'll send you that copy. And it'll have all the interview questions to do during the interview process with all these engineers, how the mistakes that you can make in the selection process and how to avoid them. Whether or not use us, I don't care. I just don't want anyone to waste any time talking to an agency that is a waste of time, because you can get so hoodwinked.
Yeah.
And it's easy to do.
Yeah. If somebody wanted to work with you, how do they reach you?
Outforce.ai, Sean, Sean, like the Irish Sean, at outforce.ai. Or just go to the website and, like I said, drop your name in. We have a database, like 80,000 companies tagged based on which domain they're best at and which tech stacks they've got the most bench strength in. And that's a great starting point. The heavy lift is the due diligence on the teams, and we help you with that.
Well, Sean, this has been fascinating. This has been fascinating. Thanks for sharing that, sharing some old war stories from the Nordfeld days.
Yeah.
But thanks for coming on Leaders and Legacies.
My pleasure, Craig. Thank you for having me.